To save Greece, Philip II had to destroy it. This is the story of that brutal unification. Following King Perdiccas' death, Macedon was collapsing, surrounded by enemies who saw a chance to invade. But they misjudged the new king, Philip II, whose ambition went beyond survival. He dreamt of uniting all of Greece. We will now show how he crushed his enemies and ended the era of the city-states. The kingdom Philip II inherited was not a powerhouse. It was a fractured, bleeding state on the verge of annihilation. His brother, King Perdiccas III, had fallen in a disastrous battle against the Illyrians, taking the flower of the Macedonian army with him. The kingdom was in mourning, its leadership shattered, its borders undefended. This power vacuum was a siren call to Macedon's opportunistic neighbors. From the north, the fierce Paeonians descended, sensing plunder. From the east, the Thracians mobilized, eager to reclaim lost territories and assert their dominance. And most dangerously, from the south, the Athenians, masters of the sea, saw their chance. They supported a pretender to the Macedonian throne, hoping to install a puppet and shatter Macedonian power permanently. The enemies of Macedon saw the perfect opportunity to invade the kingdom and tear it apart, piece by bloody piece. What they did not know, what none of them could have anticipated, was the character of the new king, Philip II. He was not a frightened regent. He was a strategic visionary, hardened by years as a hostage in Thebes, where he had studied the most advanced military tactics of the age. Where his enemies saw weakness, Philip saw a crucible. He moved with astonishing speed. Through a combination of brilliant diplomacy, bribery, and ruthless military reform, he neutralized his rivals one by one. He reorganized the Macedonian infantry, lengthening their pikes to create the terrifying phalanx, an unstoppable formation of bristling steel. He drilled his cavalry, forging the companion cavalry into the greatest shock force the world had yet seen. In less than a decade, Philip VI would make Macedon the strongest kingdom in Greece. He would destroy all his enemies, expanding his territory threefold. The Thracians were brought to heel. The Athenian pretender was forgotten. Macedon was not just saved, it was reborn in iron. But Philip's ambition went far beyond simple survival or regional dominance. He looked south at the fractured, squabbling Greek polis, Athens, Thebes, Sparta, Corinth, and saw not a collection of proud, independent states, but a self-destructive system locked in endless, petty warfare. He dreamed of something unprecedented, a united Greece. He envisioned a pan-Hellenic league, a single entity operating under the guiding hand of the Macedonian kingdom. This was a radical, offensive idea. It meant putting an end to the system of Greek city-states, polis, for the first time in their storied history. It meant the end of the fierce independence that Athens and Sparta had championed for centuries. Philip knew this dream could not be achieved through diplomacy alone. To achieve this objective, he would first have to defeat a formidable alliance of polis. These city-states violently opposed the idea of a united Greece, especially one united under what they considered the semi-barbaric kingdom of Macedon. They saw Philip not as a unifier, but as a tyrant, a threat to the democratia of Athens and the sacred autonomy of every polis. The stage was being set for a final existential conflict. Philip's grand vision was colliding with the entrenched traditions of Hellenic civilization. Philip understood the strategic situation perfectly. He knew that if Greece wanted to truly secure its future, it had to expand eastward against the colossal Persian Empire. The Persian Empire, the eternal enemy, was the true prize and the true threat. But a Greece divided against itself would be easily picked off by Persian gold and Persian armies. He had to force the Greeks to stop fighting each other and recognize their common foe. Unification was the necessary prerequisite for empire. The political situation was a tangled web of treaties and betrayals. A fragile peace had been signed between Macedon and Athens, known as the Peace of Philocrates. This treaty temporarily eliminated the threat of a direct Macedonian invasion of Attica by Philip. But the peace was deeply unpopular in Athens. With the immediate danger gone, the most virulently anti-Macedonian politicians in Athens surged in popularity. They argued that peace was merely a strategic pause for Philip, a trick to lull Athens into complacency while he consolidated his power. They painted the treaty as a shameful surrender to a northern strongman. Without a doubt, the most prominent figure of this anti-Macedonian propaganda was the orator Demosthenes. In his speeches known as the Philippics, he directed the Athenian populace against Philip of Macedon, attacking his reputation and image. Standing before the assembly, Demosthenes used his incredible rhetorical skill to demonize the Macedonian king. He portrayed Philip as a faithless, ambitious warlord, a man whose promises were worthless. He attacked Philip's very character, mocking his battle scars and painting him as a crude ruler, unfit to lead civilized Greeks. These Philippics were not just speeches, they were political weapons designed to inflame public opinion and shatter the fragile peace. Demosthenes' voice echoed through Athens, demanding resistance, demanding that Athens reclaim its leadership of the Greeks and stand against the Macedonian shadow. But Demosthenes was not alone. There were many other Athenians who actively worked to undermine confidence in this fragile peace agreement. Politicians, generals, and merchants all saw Philip's rise as a direct threat to Athenian influence and commercial power. They spread rumors, funded proxies, and sabotaged diplomatic efforts. Furthermore, Athens was not limiting its opposition to words. The city was providing direct and indirect support to Philip's remaining enemies. On Nasir, they sent funds to Thracian tribes resisting Macedonian rule. They offered diplomatic cover to cities defying Philip's authority. This covert support, combined with the overt hostility from orators like Demosthenes, made the peace untenable. The fragile truce was crumbling day by day. War between the two sides seemed not just possible, but inevitable. The only reason Philip had not already declared war on Athens was his methodical patience. He was a master of grand strategy. He would not be goaded into a premature conflict. He wanted to secure his northern borders first before committing his full strength to an invasion of the south. He spent several years campaigning relentlessly in Thrace and Scythia, pushing his borders to the Danube. He solidified his control over the mines which funded his armies and ensured that no barbarian threat could stab him in the back. He was meticulously setting every piece on the board. Finally, with his northern borders secured and his army at its peak, Philip was ready. The time for diplomacy and proxy wars was over. In 340 BC, Philip declared war on Athens. The accusations were clear. Athens had violated the peace of Philocrates, aided his enemies, and acted with unrelenting hostility. The declaration sent a shockwave through Greece. The final confrontation was at hand. However, the armed conflict did not begin immediately. Philip, a master of timing, waited for the perfect pretext. It came the following year in 339 BC. The Amphictyonic League, a pan-Hellenic religious council, became embroiled in a dispute. They called upon Philip, in his capacity as a respected member, to lead a fourth sacred war against the polis of Amphissa. Amphissa had committed a sacrilege, and Philip was now the chosen instrument of divine justice. This was the legal and moral cover he needed. He was not invading southern Greece as a conqueror. He was marching as the champion of the league. His army moved south. The victory against Amphissa was swift and comfortable. By the end of 339 BC, the campaign was over. His army now stood in Phocis. From this strategic location, he was within striking distance of Attica. He was at the gates of Athens itself. The Athenian war party, led by Demosthenes, had gotten the war they wanted, but it was now on their doorstep. Panic gripped Athens. Demosthenes, anguished by the war now looming over his city, scrambled to build a coalition. He made numerous desperate attempts to form an alliance of Peleus against the kingdom of Macedon to stop Philip. And he traveled tirelessly, delivering passionate speeches, warning that this was the final stand for Greek liberty.
Your very liberty.
He begged, he flattered, he threatened. He reminded Thebes of Macedonian ambition.
This wolf is Philip, and the lamb is Thebes. He means to devour us all if we do not stand together.
He reminded Corinth of its
gaze
pride.
upon your protector. This magnificent Poseidon proves your mastery of the seas, unmatched in all of Greece.
He called upon the Spartans, but they remained aloof, content in their isolation. His efforts were largely in vain. The shadow of Macedonian power was too long. Many states were too afraid to provoke Philip. Others were bribed into neutrality. In the end, only Thebes answered the call to arms. Thebes, a traditional rival of Athens, agreed to an alliance, recognizing that Philip was the greater threat. A few other smaller states and mercenary bands also responded, But the grand alliance Demosthenes had dreamed of failed to materialize. It would be Athens, Thebes, and their minor allies against the full might of the Macedonian kingdom. Everything was now prepared. The allied Greek army marched north to block Philip's advance. The two forces met on the plain of Chaeronea in Boeotia. This was the contest that would decide the fate of Greece. The air was thick with tension as the two largest armies seen in Greece for a generation prepared for battle. His army was a professional, veteran force, loyal to him personally. It included the impenetrable phalanx and the elite companion cavalry. The alliance of Polis, led by Athens and Thebes, countered with a slightly larger force, numbering around 35,000 hoplites. This army was primarily composed of citizen militias. While brave, they lacked the professional training, cohesion, and unified command of their Macedonian counterparts. The Thebans, however, were renowned soldiers, and with them was their most elite force, the Sacred Band, 300 elite warriors, undefeated in battle. Philip, a tactical genius, arranged his army with precision. He placed his 18-year-old son and heir, Alexander, on the left wing, at the head of the companion cavalry. This was Alexander's first major command. Directly opposite them, Philip placed the Thebans and their formidable Sacred Band. It was a sign of great respect, pitting his best cavalry, led by his heir, against the enemy's finest troops. In the center, the Macedonian phalanx held the line, a forest of pikes facing the allied infantry from the smaller pulley. Philip himself took command of the right wing. He positioned his most experienced infantrymen and Hypaspes, elite shield bearers, here. Opposite him stood the Athenians, led by inexperienced generals, their ranks filled with the citizen militia, burning with patriotic fervor but lacking discipline. The battle began as the sun climbed high over the plain. The two massive lines of infantry advanced, and the clash of shields and spears echoed like thunder. On the right, Philip initiated his plan. He ordered his wing to begin a slow, controlled withdrawal, feigning a retreat. His troops pulled back step by step, their shields locked, their pikes angled, goading the enemy forward. The inexperienced Athenian militia saw this apparent retreat and roared in triumph. Believing the Macedonian right was breaking, they surged forward, breaking their own disciplined line. "They run," was the cry. They sought to press their apparent advantage, pushing Philip's men back towards the high ground. As the Athenians surged forward, they began to separate from their own center. The troops of the Allied center tried to move left in a desperate attempt to maintain the line. But the Athenian charge was too reckless, too fast. A gap was created. It was a fatal breach in the Allied line, separating the charging Athenians on their left from the steadfast Thebans on their right. This was the moment Philip had been waiting for. On the Macedonian left, the young Alexander had been watching, holding his cavalry in check. Now, he saw the gap. He gave the order. Feigned at the head of his companion cavalry, Alexander charged. Dabur and more 2,000 horsemen slammed into the exposed flank of the Allied center. The cavalry charge was devastating. It shattered the central formation, which dissolved into chaos. The Thebans and other allies on the right wing were now taken from behind. As the sacred band, true to their oath, refused to retreat. They formed a circle, fighting back to back, and were annihilated where they stood, a monument to doomed bravery. Simultaneously, Philip, on the right, halted his feigned retreat. His elite troops slammed their shields forward and counterattacked. Chaeronea, the Macedonian phalanxes, fresh and organized, crashed into the winded and disordered Athenians. The Athenian lines, stretched thin and exhausted from their premature charge, crumpled. The fight turned into a rout. The Allied army collapsed. As the Battle of Chaeronea was over. It was a total Macedonian victory. Following this great and decisive victory, the political landscape of Greece was irrevocably altered. For the first time in its long and storied history, Greece was united under a single power. The era of the independent warring city-state was over. The dream of Philip and the nightmare of Demosthenes had become reality. Macedon was the undisputed master of Hellas. What happened next stunned the defeated Greeks. Philip gave very special treatment to the vanquished. He sought not to subjugate, but to integrate. He knew he needed the Greeks as allies, not as bitter subjects. Instead of enslaving the defeated armies and occupying their territories, he acted with calculated clemency. The prisoners of war from the Allied polis were released. He did, however, install Macedonian garrisons in the Cadmea, the Acropolis of Thebes. Tummy, this was a pointed message. Thebes, which had betrayed a previous alliance with him, would be watched. But its citizens were spared. Meanwhile, the defeated Athens, which had been the moral and political center of the opposition, received the most remarkable treatment of all. They too recovered their prisoners without ransom. In an incredible gesture of respect, a Macedonian honor guard, led by the young Alexander himself, escorted the ashes of the Athenian fallen back to their city. Everyone, the very men who had fought to stop Philip, were returned to their homeland with full military honors. In Athens, the citizens gathered for a public funeral. In a final, tragic irony, the man chosen to give the emotional funeral oration for the fallen was Demosthenes. The man who had instigated the war now had the agonizing duty of eulogizing the men who had died in it. What Philip II essentially wanted with these actions was not to gloat in his victory, but to conciliate and unify the Greeks. His lenient terms were not a sign of weakness, but of profound strategic wisdom. He had demonstrated his power on the battlefield. Now he demonstrated his capacity for statesmanship. He immediately called for a congress of all Greek states at Corinth. There he formed the League of Corinth, a pan-Hellenic federation with himself as the hegemon leader. He had finally achieved his dream. He had ended the internecine warfare of the polis. With Greece finally united at his back, Philip turned his gaze east. Chaeronea. His true ultimate goal was now within reach, to lead a combined Greco-Macedonian army against their eternal enemy, the Persian Empire. And the unification of Greece was never the end, it was the beginning.